I have been holding a little something, and I thought tonight would be a good night since we have people from out of town, and it's a glorious holy holiday. But first, some minor text. Over the last few months, I continue to receive questions having to do with the matter of criticism, and me pointing out very, very correctly that there is a way in which no one can do this and be a critic of life, notwithstanding the kind of stories you hear about holy men raising hell or holy men raising holy hell. There is a way in which you cannot be critical. It is not something that you can be taught. You could certainly make some sort of rule if this was an ordinary religion and say no one can be critical, which of course in a sense I have said. I don't want to hear you do it. But no one would really learn anything from that, because it is a manifestation, a real one, of someone who understands what's going on. But I am fully aware that people for varying lengths of time feel as though that is some kind of absolute stumbling block to their intellectual understanding, that surely there's a place for criticism. And what if some of you had a job being a book reviewer, based upon normal perusal of what goes on in that field? You've got to be critical or you can't hold your job. Part of the fun of ordinary people reading reviews of books or movies or records is to hear some literate smart aleck, take on the world, or take on those foolish people that call themselves artistes. But let me point out at a very basic level that many people obviously have trouble ever arriving at on their own, and that is a difference between what I mean by criticism and what would amount to pertinent action. That is not the kind of criticism I am talking about if in some way you could act remedially. And one example that for some reason comes to mind, and for some reason I suspect will strike many, many people, would be like the difference in your automobile, as strange as it may sound, going awry. Some problem with your car. Now, it would be one thing, what I'm referring to right now is a kind of pertinent action, if you could do something about it. Whether you actually could repair it yourself, whether you could take it to someone who deals in such matters, and at a reasonable price they do it, and it gets done correctly. And it's just sort of the upkeep of being alive. It'd be the difference between that and someone sitting around, or you could even have your car fixed and still go through this, that the internal voices begin to speak, and to say the very least, you give them a full hearing as they decry the obvious, probably communist-inspired decline in the pride of the American workforce. That is, to entertain that own running static within yourself that the world is going to hell. To decry not only Detroit, but if you happen to have a car made on other shores, the voices say, well, I knew it. We should have bombed the Japanese off the map when we had the chance, because now they're trying to take us over in another way. They're trying to sell us cars. They're going to drive us crazy. They're going to slowly nickel and dime us into poverty. Now, that may appear to be a crude example, but you should be able to find your own that's going on continually. The one that seems to be harder for people, especially in the mid-circuit, is such things as to entertain the kind of noise that comes from your own wiring, decrying the political situations in the world, of how injustice has just obviously been turned loose upon this planet, how the economic atmosphere of this whole little sphere is imbalanced. There is no justice. Something is wrong. There's probably that secret old group of men running the whole world, the Rothschilds or the Smiths or somebody, that continually, just on a whim, decide, hey, He tells his lieutenant, go out and cause a depression, run the price of gold down, and wipe out all those peons who have been buying gold, and the next week I'll buy it all back. People who believe that. People who believe that there is some kind of conspiracy going on, that there is some group of men or there is some kind of conspiracy between nations, that wars go on, not because nations are actually hostile toward one another. They do it to cut down on the ranks of the unemployed. They do it to give their army something to do. That there is a big conspiracy of what's going on and you just know it. People should not be hungry. People should not be abused politically. But can you take any pertinent action? Not just you personally, but could you even engage yourself in something? Or are you going to sit and be involved with TOA? Thinking of action. And in this case, it's kind of a subheading of SOTOA, suffering over thinking of action. I do not offer that to people who are still involved with that as a flippant placebo of some kind, because you have to begin to see it yourself, and that's what I'm going to get into, that I said would be the heart of the sermon for the evening. But there is an absolute difference if you want to start out with something to use the yellow circuit with. What I am calling criticism. It is natural, which of course is synonymous with mechanical. You do not have to make any effort. It does not take any kind of willful analysis of what's going on. It is the running feeling within everyone that things are not right. That is what I mean by criticism. But if you can take pertinent action, whether it be getting your automobile repaired at a reasonable price, or whether you indeed can do something about what appears to be economic or political injustices, then that would be pertinent action. But that kind of pertinent action also, even should you undertake such, is going to be slowed to the point that it can be absolutely stopped without you noticing it by criticism becoming a part of an unrecognized coalition between you trying to take some kind of action and you still entertaining these voices of saying, well, the world is going to hell. I'm wasting my time. There is no pride anymore. No one cares what they do. No one is interested but me. I'm the only person that sees the severity of the crisis. It ceases to be any kind of pertinent action. You have then become just part of the masses again. You are back in your erstwhile position of being a critic on the daily paper. I have a new term for you. I don't know whether to do it with the verbal snideness that I heard it in my own head. It is spelled T-A-T-A, and for some reason I can imagine 7 or 8 year olds, especially boys, used to do it, saying ta-ta, in case you ever have to pronounce it. I didn't know I would ever have to. But now I want to present you with a question, and I want you to listen. Ta-ta in this case meant things as they are. Now I want you to listen, because this is not a rhetorical question. And please note, if I must, which I will emphasize again, the word apparently, because all you got to do is look within yourself, the way things have operated, the way they continue to want to operate below the line, and that is the word apparently. And the question is this: are men wired up first to see things apparently as they are, and then apparently develop a kind of critical template in regards to how it seems things should be? Or are men apparently wired up, almost from birth is what I mean, with this kind of individual critical template, and then apparently develop the sight to see things as they are. Do I only have one gesture for the camera? Looking thoughtful and intelligent. What would Benny Hill do? I want to be sure everyone heard it. Take it at the most simple level. As far back as you can remember, you and everyone else. By the time you reach the age of, let us say, 12, to use the great historic, is it doing all right? Age, you and everyone had the feeling that things are not right. The complaints against your parents, the way they treat you, the complaints against education, the complaints against the form of education, the complaints against your playmates, the complaints against what they're showing on TV, what your family would let you watch. It passes for being one so-called personality. Right now, and a variation of that is what I'm referring to as a critical template. Everyone has it. But my question that no one has ever asked on this planet is look back down your own nervous system and from that try to expand it into all of life, everyone else. Are people apparently born with this template already in them? Let's just say that it finally manifests itself at the age of 12. Can you actually look back, but now you should be able to get past the superficial points of saying, well, I did pick all this up from my parents. I did get it from my religion. I did get it from my culture. But now, if all of you on a good day cannot see beyond that, then you're in sad shape. It just seems to be there that there is this critical template that I know things are not right. And my question to you is that apparently already there, just genetically already wired up, and it finally reaches some kind of vocal maturity, let's say at the age of 12, and it's there. And then it is as though the person looks around and then realizes, all right, ta-ta, things as they are do not match my critical template. And my critical template is what's telling me, and everyone else, the way things should be. Now, if you just entertain your own voices, I could surely leave it there, and or I could have made that a statement that that's what happens. And you should notice by now the way the wiring works, that everybody would have gone, yeah, never thought about it, but yeah, it's obviously true. I can reverse it, and it's also obviously true. It's what I'm asking you, and there's a purpose in this. That is, the second possibility. Is it that a person reaches some kind of age, as I'm sort of arbitrarily picking out 12 this evening, and they sort of reach the first level of so-called maturity, and they look around and get some notion of the way things are. They're no longer children in the absolute sense. They begin to look around, have some kind of questions other than, can I have a new bicycle? That apparently they begin to look upon life as this may be a bigger drama than pulling someone's pigtails or winning a baseball game with the kids down the street. Is it that they look around, that is everyone, and get some notion of, now here's the way life is situated. I begin to get a sense of what's going on, and then apparently do they in some way develop this kind of critical template in which they then, through their sight, superimpose upon things as they are so as to judge the way things should be in the areas in wherein life and everyone else is lacking. I am not going to talk much more about that. But I would strongly urge you that that can be a most explosive area. And then anyone who really wants to pursue it, take a second question. If the answer, and of course you can make it any answer you want to until you begin to see, was the first, that is apparently born already wired up to see things as they are, and then in some way, of course ordinary people would say, well, this is, you're talking about now environment, that in some way they're molded, their opinions formed, etc., and then they develop the critical template. If it were that, then the second question I was going to give you is then, under that condition, could you say that tata could equal E? All right, here's the heart. I've been talking around the edges of this. I strongly suggest some of you, this may be the end of this line of mapping. But then again, many of you, if not all of you, should suspect that very shortly, in some way, I'm going to have to go off in another direction. The kinds of things that I have been verbally talking about and drawing in symbols, and the lines in which you have been pursuing some of this, is going to take yet another turn. Surely all of you knew that. I'm not going to tell you what it is, even assuming I know. It will come up in conjunction, as you might imagine, with these other activities outside this small circle of people. And I'm going to take as strong a measure as I can verbally, and however else I'm doing this. And some of you, we should be able to wrap up what would seem to be a lot of the profitable areas you have been neuralizing, pursuing, pondering, thinking, wondering, writing, running about over the last year and a half. Now, in a sense, this has to do with the ultimate statement, or the ultimate mapping, of the question of good and evil. And I want to verbally remind everyone, don't just take my words, you should have some feel of this within yourself. This question of good and evil is not some philosophical, theoretical question. Now, it has, at least verbally, always lain in the hands of philosophers, religious writers, that in some way this was an area, albeit perhaps important, it is an area that is outside the body politic, it is outside the everyday affairs of Wall Street, commerce, warfare, that perhaps this is of some ultimate significance, but it is in a very diminishing thrust when it reaches the street, when it reaches us politicians, us businessmen, us people who are not philosophers, us people who are not very religious. And it does not, because what I'm going to attempt to tell you very quickly is the fact that this is the heart of what makes things move at this level. Now, good and evil, of course, the words are around before you and I, right and wrong. I would lay on good and evil because to most people, at least in their mid-circuits, it seems to have the greatest impact, that it has at least a moral inference of some kind. But it is not a philosophical question. It is not a religious question. And about as far as I will or can go in words, I'm going to try and push you right to the edge of what it is. In a sense, I'm going to tell you directly. But still, you've got to see it. Let's take the matter that I have been describing variously as the three forces, the three areas, the three flows, the three possibilities. Now let's take the two that without any doubt, even though I have attempted to expand your perception of it in the widest way, the two that still would seem to ordinary consciousness, and then to perhaps a little above the level of ordinary consciousness, that would seem to be identifiable and would seem to be possible to directly relate to everyday affairs. That is, C and D as it would relate to good and evil. And I have not really done anything to absolutely dissuade you that there is no connection. I have simply tried to expand it. But now let me ask you, not just to neuralize this, just try and hear it, because some of it I'm just going to just state it. C and D is a matter of either heat gain or heat loss. I will add that there is no particular reason that I care to give you that I used heat, because I could have said energy, and I'm going to expand it a little bit. It is absolutely beyond all notions that I have tried to, as fast as possible, pull you from the center over the last year or more, of trying to show you through all these old stories that I made up, which I guess belies them being old stories, of one man's apparent good luck being somebody else's apparent bad luck, or that which would appear to be good from one group's viewpoint could be evil from another. It does not take the mind of Leish LaRue, who was a forerunner, for those of you who don't know, of Einstein, to come up with those kind of examples. Those kind of examples have been around as long as written history has been around. But it has always led back to those old questions that, with ordinary consciousness, of how can this be? How can it be that there seems to be relative degrees of it? How can it be that the guides have made us all, and us, that is, us speakers, see what is good, and this other group opposes us, and yet the gods made them? And how can they be so evil? And we'll have to leave it to the theologians. It is a matter, absolutely, of whether there has been heat loss or heat gain. Now, it does not matter the kind of political or religious rhetoric that's involved. And perhaps some of you may even get a glimpse, if I can help, that there is no difference between speaking of the body politic or the church. I mean by that all religions, the body of the church. Because what we're talking about is when you see, which is before you everywhere, it is a part of binary consciousness that there is good, and regardless of what I've tricked you into seeing sometimes, line level consciousness will tell you forever, because it is a part of that binary perception that continually, in my affairs, the affairs of individual men, the affairs of large groups of people, there is that which is good and that which is evil. There's just no doubt about it. It is a matter of whether heat is being gained or whether heat is being lost. Remember, you can make this heat slash energy slash, and it's really a matter of groups of people within the body of life, and what would amount to locus cura and locus comita, to mix up a little Spanish and Latin, because I couldn't come up with what I wanted to say in Latin 10 minutes ago. And so I referred to my Spanish expert here. It is the locale of responsibility is what I was intending to say, and the locale of food. Now I'll give you an absolute splendid example because they're everywhere. And all of you are big enough now not to get involved with any voice telling you that I'm talking about politics. But that is the obvious example. Two great political powers. I might as well use living examples, but especially you people that get this by tape or at some other time, I am not talking about politics as you know it. These are just horizontal examples. The United States and the USSR appear to be an epitome of mortal enemies. The president of this nation's even referred to them in recent times as the evil empire. There are voices in you, if you keep up with politics, which is not even that important, but there are voices in you that will read what is said about the USSR and the way they operate. The voices just say, right at line level, you are educated, sophisticated. It's in national news magazines, bylines of respected reporters. It just, as far as words go, has got to be based upon reality. And what they describe going on, there is no way that you can say that's good. I mean, start at the easiest point. And so it goes all the way into, they are just the living epitome of evil. I can't explain it, but they just are. So let me take an example that's happened in the last few years. The USSR, as it's reported here, invaded Afghanistan. From their viewpoint, it was a heat gain. They expanded, in the body of life, they expanded the locus cura. That is, they expanded the locale of their responsibility. And they also expanded the food supply. And by that, I don't mean kumquats. They gained people, they gained land, they gained the potential of more heat. Now try your best not to listen to voices talking about politics. Maybe late now, but I could back up and say country X and country Y. And country X was bordered by country Z. And one day, country X, with all kinds of obviously flimsy, spurious political rhetoric, explained to the world why country X has invaded and taken over country Z. Country Y says, I shall not be fooled. Those explanations are just transparent lies. But the country X, in this case the Russians, what they had was a heat gain. They had an energy gain. But from our viewpoint, the body politic of this part of the world, they saw it as a heat loss because they lost a potential, as they would call it, friend. At the time it happened, politically speaking, it was, I think, generally considered that Afghanistan was, somewhat neutral, which is not even that important. But at least they were not part of what we saw as being at least an arm, a part of the evil community of country X. But now they have been invaded, they have been absorbed. From country Y's viewpoint, it has been a heat loss. That is the beginning and end of good and evil. But if you can start to get a glimpse of this, it is beyond the point of any kind of relativity. It is an absolute fact that the person or groups of persons, the locale, a certain locale within the body of life, if it had a heat gain, then using my three forces, without any debate, there is nowhere to look for any kind of relative argument, what they had was a C occasion. It was not the subjugation, the attack, the misuse of a group of people. It was a heat gain. And that's what life is after. It does not mean at all that that situation is static. that that is the final statement, because nothing is the final statement in the body of life except something that has died and then it's expelled. It's waste. But there is no question, once you begin to see this, there is no longer any doubt in some theoretical field of, wait a minute, I've tried to push my thinking that what one group does is proper. That is my group. And then people who act otherwise, the body politic, the body religious, they're evil to varying degrees. They're not good, and in many cases they're just absolutely evil. And it's not a question of trying to stretch, once you begin to see it in some theoretical way, that, well, I'll become magnanimous or I'll become so wise that I'll understand, well, country Z or country X, they're a little less educated than we are. They're not as economically as stable. I don't approve of it, but I guess we got to make allowances. You just don't understand it. It's a heat transfer. If they gain heat, if they gain energy, life approves of it. And there is no question of some kind of relative attitude. If you were there, and if you were there, you would be where life had you in operation for a certain reason, you would see. You couldn't analyze it, would be beyond any doubt what we did, what my leaders, what this body politic of which I'm a part did, is see. Forget the political rhetoric. But they're threatening our borders. The political situation was so unstable it threatened us. We didn't want to take them over. We don't even want this little country. They're a drain. Forget all that. Or forget some religion in history, saying it is our duty. We don't want to put these people in captivity, but they are not worshiping the correct gods. It's our duty. We don't want them. Not personally. I'm not trying to talk them into anything. I'm not trying to talk them into believing like I do. I'm trying to talk them into believing like God told me they should believe. Forget all of that. It's a matter of whether it is a heat loss or a heat gain. From the position that there has been a heat gain, it is C. There is nothing else to be said. Now, you may very well be in another part of life's body at that time. It may appear to be political, it may appear to be social, it could appear to be economic, and it doesn't matter. I'm telling you, it is beyond rhetoric of any kind. But the example I made, that country Y was formerly somewhat of an ally of country Z, the one that's just gotten taken over by country X. To country Y, it is not a political question. That's at the ordinary horizontal level. What has happened, they have had a heat loss. Forget the rhetoric, well, we've lost a good ally. They let us put up bases there. They talked to us. They're going to let us bring in, put up a missile base. They traded with us. We had a good trade balance with them. They were trying to have democratic elections, assuming country X was democratic. Forget all that. I'm telling you what happened. Country Y suffered a heat loss. And it comes out verbally that we lost a potential political ally. They lost heat. And from that viewpoint, it is D. It's not relative. But forget the talk. Forget country X rattling its sabers or having people stand up and denounce country Y for their unholy, opportunistic invasions of smaller countries. There's nothing to explain country Y. Absolutely, in that exchange, they lost heat. And it was D. And there's no further explanation needed. Any further explanation is not only spurious, it's specious. And it's worse than that, but there is no worse word. It's just irrelevant. It's life still talking to itself at the most mundane level possible for humanity. One group, one locale in the body of life suffered a heat loss. Another area experienced in that same apparent situation of just taking these three entities of countries X, Y, and Z, is there is a transfer, and if there is a loss in one locale, there is a gain in another locale. That is good and evil, and it is not relative once you can see it. When I started out telling you there's no such thing as good and evil, if you recall, I used to say, well, that's not absolutely true. But it took a long time for me to point enough of you in this direction, but that is the nature of good and evil. And it has validity. In this case, the group I'm pointing out that's nationwide, evil has been done to that locale in the sense that they lost heat, they lost energy. And you can take it down. As I said, you have got to get beyond that point, but you can take what ordinary consciousness verbalizes, and it is a reflection of what I'm telling you. That is saying, all right, country Y could have been or was a fairly decent political ally, but now that they have been swallowed up by our evil adversaries, they have closed our bases, they've taken over some of the equipment we had there, some of the things we were trading for, some of the chemicals and the minerals, some of the manufacturing that they're involved with were things we needed. It has upset us politically, it has upset us economically. It's going to take a period of time and additional effort for us to come up with new sources of these materials. We'll have to find a new place in that part of the world, read that part of life's body, to come up with these necessary materials to fill in the gap that's been left by us losing this heat. What they describe it as, we've lost foodstuffs, we've lost magnesium that they were producing, we lost a good locale to put in defensive and offensive bases very close to country Y, to country X. Everything they're describing is a reflection of something true. And insofar as that locale in life's body, D, absolute evil, has taken place because there was a heat loss. You might as well have been wounded in a part of your body and you lost blood. It is absolute evil, but only on the basis that in the exchange there was a heat or energy loss. Let me throw in one more and a half pieces. I'll make this one more a question. Could any of you, based upon what I've just said about C and D, under those conditions, this elusive E, could any of you get any sensation, any glimpse, any suspicion somewhere close to this situation I've just described, that E might be oblivious to whether any occurrence, such as the one I made up or anything else, of any occurrence wherein it seemed that an absolute C or D had taken place, which I just told you actually does. That there is good and evil. Except now, if you ever begin to understand it, of course I wouldn't have to use such crude terms. That you understand it's either a matter of a heat loss or a heat gain. But based upon that, of me telling you that if you can see it in a certain way, not some theoretical way, if you can see it, then there is always, to some degree, an absolute matter that there has been a heat loss or a heat gain. And if it's the former, it's evil to that locale in the body, to that locus cura of what that section of life's body was responsible for at that time. It lost heat, it lost energy. The horizontal word says we lost an ally. We lost naval bases. We lost a good source of magnesium. It lost heat. So based upon, if you can hold that and try to expand it, of C and D absolutely existing, with no question of relativity, no question of a viewpoint, no question of political, religious, philosophical, economic rhetoric, that it's simply a scientific matter of whether there was a heat/energy loss or a gain. Under those conditions, then to go into my famous third area, E, could any of you get any glimpse of the possibility that under those conditions, E might very well be absolutely oblivious to whether these two absolutes exist? And any occurrence that E would have no conception of things absolutely being a C or a D. Let me give you the half. Could you further neuralize an extended dimension from us? I'll say it again. I'm not playing with words. But an extended dimension wherein there would be, let us call it, a fourth something instead of my three, my C, D, and E. Just an extended dimension. So we're living in it, but you can't see extensions beyond where we are with ordinary consciousness. But there could be an extended dimension wherein there would be this fourth force, if we want to call it that, that likewise could be absolutely blind to the apparent characteristics of our three. I'll give you one hint, as I've been doing more of late. The closer you get to seeing some of this for yourself, I can finally promise the prize in the Cracker Jack box. As I have so aptly put it in the last few months, comma, if you remember where I was in this sentence, comma, will answer, to say the least, a multitude of the great historic questions. Since I don't seem to be given with you people to great histrionics, not even much of a stage presence, I will insist one more time that what I told you, some of you should be able to run right out to the edge of the universe with this. And you might as well, because coming shortly, all of this that I've been talking about, we're just going to abandon. You may still write me notes for a while of, you know, would you say something else about C, D, and E? But don't get your hopes up. I have, absolutely, the last 20 minutes given you enough information. I just stated it outright. That don't get hung up on my examples, don't get hung up, because that's why I tried to cover that no matter what the rhetoric appears to come from, it's the same thing. There is no difference in someone trying to convert someone else to a religion than there is one country attacking another. There is no difference between those two and someone trying to get the better of a business deal. There's no difference. It just apparently, in some kind of magnitude, is apparently to ordinary consciousness, the way in which you're wired up. Remember last week I pointed out to you, it was kind of a subtle preface to this evening, that everyone is wired up to be on the side of C or D as they perceive it in any situation, and they can't help it. And so according to the way that you're already wired up, there seems to be a question of severity. All right, well, this corporation attempted a hostile buyout of some other corporation, but they did it according to SEC regulations. It was all above board, and there's a difference between that and a guy on a street corner coming up and saying, do you know what, have you got the time? And you say, yeah. And he says, that ain't what I mean. Just give me your watch, sucker. Or he cuts off the man's hand and grabs his watch. And you say, well, there is a great difference between that and a legal hostile takeover of one corporation of another. Or there is a difference between one country, good countries like ours. We happen to be here, if we were in Russia or country X, it appeared to be the same way at your line level consciousness, believe it or not. That there is a difference between us attempting to go into these other more youthful countries and trying, based upon the validity and the righteousness of our cause, to show them that they should be more like us, and especially give us good trading privileges and open up the border and let us make a few bucks off of them, supply us things that we need, This is a friendly, a beneficial, a mutually beneficial association. It can be called that, can be described in that way, but there's no difference. There is no difference between that and this country walking into this small country and saying, all right, to the whole population, up against the wall. You're now ours. And consciousness says that is not true, and I'm telling you it is absolutely true. It's not a matter of some morality. There is no morality in your body as to staying alive. There is no morality as to what certain organs of the body must extract from food you've taken in. There is no morality in the way in which you breathe and you destroy small animals, you destroy small microscopic entities every time you breathe, every time you slap your and wipe your forehead. There is no morality to it. The morality is a matter of whether something survives or whether it does not. But at ordinary level, where human consciousness is, it can appear to be, and I understand it completely, but it can appear to be a matter that is so horrendous that this country just went in there and just stopped these little people. Just told them, listen, you belong to us, you and everything here, and don't give us any problem or we'll shoot you and your family. It's just despicable. But I'm telling you what it is. It is life feeding itself. And the good and evil does exist, but not on a moral basis. It exists on the basis of the ultimate morality of whether the entity is surviving or not, and that is whether there has been a heat gain or a heat loss. And once you see that, there's no longer any question about a sense of morality. There's no sense, and that is not, of course, any kind of attack on real feeling. But there is no question, there is no continuing burning itch about how can there be evil in the world. It's not that. It's a scientific fact that there cannot be a one-way transfer. It cannot be that everyone wins in a heat transfer. It is physically impossible. Both parties cannot gain. If one party gains, one party loses. Tomorrow it may be turned the other way. And tomorrow, of course, could be 50 years from now. It could be 500 years from now. But life grows in a way that I have pointed out to you most properly is not in a straight line by any definition. And not just a straight line on paper. I point out to you that it staggers. It does just like you and I are wont to do, at least me, I'm sure some of you are beyond that, that operate on the belief that if you're going to do something, you've got to overdo it or you hadn't really done it. And I assure you that you and I could not do that were it not for the fact that life does it. I believe perhaps I will have a pizza tonight. No, I'll have 3. And the only way that you know you've had enough is when you've had too much. So it is not simply a matter of it not being a straight line. It's a matter that it staggers. It continually overdoes it to readjust what it's doing. But it does not overdo it. It does not stagger simply in your group, in your locale, in your locus. But that is part of what things also that some of you should already suspected, and you can't formulate it in words, and even I can't formulate in a way to satisfy the reality of it, but I'm pointing you in that direction. Some of you should have had some kind of higher circuit suspicion as to why there are different races, nationalities, and religions, when, from one level, they seem to be at the heart of most of human conflict. What do I mean most? All. I mean most. That if indeed we could produce utopia, if we could make everybody something, if we make everybody Jewish, if we make everybody green and all the same sex, and we were all inverted Reformed Buddhist of the third school, if we could do that, the point being, from a certain ordinary yellow circuit viewpoint, it wouldn't matter what we were. If we could just simply make everybody the same, we would have stopped all human conflict. No political differences, no racial differences, no nationalistic, chauvinistic arguments between us. And to those voices in you and outside of you that have always said such things, but now you should have a quite clear suspicion that, all right, ta-ta, That is the way things seem to be. And there is a quite persuasive, quite widespread critical template in me and all over the world, even people of different races and religions as me, that mouth the same thing, that life even talks in other parts of its body, that something is wrong, that people say they're serving higher spirits, and then fight over it. Something is amiss. So there's the critical template. But things as they are, but now you should have some transatlantic suspicion that, all right, that's the way things are. Something is being served. That it appears from one level to be, in a charitable way to say, the height of stupidity is to have two little groups that claim to be even the same religion, but two offshoots, two sects within one religion. They even claim the same God, and day by day they're killing each other, cutting each other's throat, blowing up each other's car, killing innocent women and children, as they say in the news. It's just staggering. This can't be. Life is obviously about to fall apart. It is not a matter of morality, it is a matter of food, of energy, of heat being transferred. And every time there is a gain in one place, it might only be across a little line drawn through a city. It may be across a little line that is only drawn in the circuitry of the people involved. That all you've got to do is move an inch away. And where there's been a loss here, there's been a gain. But once you can see that, the place where there was a loss, D did take place at that locale at that time. That it was evil. For that locale, we lost heat. We lost energy. I know that this is, I shouldn't say shit like this. I started to say I know how sticky this is. The time is running out in a certain sense, so. Let me pull up on, how about a common example? All of you great occult, mystical, spiritual people of the past, tell me this. Now, surely all of you by now have rearranged your memory and screwed around with your psyche enough that you can do this. That you can remember, even back when you were trying to be a good person and live by your astrological signs and read Drew Bear's books, but the times you would suddenly, in fits of uncontrollable weirdness and evilness, you got angry at somebody. I'm talking about real anger. Scream out at somebody, even close enough to hit them. Or maybe at least for you women, just inside you just hate their guts and was already planning all the great dastardly deeds you would do to them, at least verbally. How, now that you can remember back in a certain way, how do you explain the fact that you're suddenly enthused with an unexpected but quite real, exceptionally real burst of energy? Did I still not get crude enough? The fun, in a certain way, of getting mad. All the time I insisted to you that there was no such thing as righteous indignation. There's no such thing as a holy war. All right, let's go back and talk more in the lines I'm talking tonight. At the ordinary level, everybody, you get a thrill's name the word. It is new heat, it is new energy to get angry. Even if it's just small time, it's just riding along, and a guy pulls out and almost hits you, and you do what I asked you, you remember the rhetorical question a while back, pulls out and almost hits you, and you have to swerve in another lane, somebody almost hits you, and he's gone, and you blow the horn and holler, "You goddamn son of a fucking bitch! You ignorant bastard!" How do you feel after that? Forget any sense of morality. Or the guys want me to do that. Your eyes get like this, your breathing picks up, and you could just be on the way home with nothing to do, and suddenly you think, hell, I'll stop at that new club. You can almost feel sexy, almost feel suddenly sociable. And if you begin to lose some of it, you can think back. People don't plan this, nobody's ever analyzed it, but Then you can start thinking, well, maybe I ever get home, the old lady's got supper waiting, the kids are waiting. And something comes back to you. You see a car that looks like the one that did it. And you think again, those ignorant sons of bitches. And plus I noticed this tag was from Nebraska. Couldn't you imagine they probably get their licenses from Sears and Roebuck? Goddamn sons of bitches on the highway. And it's like all over again that somebody has slipped you, a half of a 10-gram Benny, a little amphetamine. How do you explain that, dear friends? Since you don't believe it's the work of the devil, I'll tell you why it is. No, one I already told you. And yet, from almost every viewpoint in the world, including probably what was already wired into you, I shouldn't do that. That is not, even if you weren't that religious, that is not the way of a civilized, humane person. And so something told you I should not do that, and yet, if you can remember back, it's still there, it's still going on. I don't know how much you people entertain it individually and can feel it. You did that, which rhetorically would be proclaimed almost across the civilized world, regardless of nationality or religion, as being unacceptable. You should not hate your fellow man. And yet there was a kind of enjoyment to it, because there was a heat gain. So why worry about what's going on in the Middle East? Why worry about what's going on in Northern Ireland? You got it right here. Of course, this does not change. For any of you out of town in some later date that gets more and more confused with the way I operate, this does not change the fact that you cannot do that and pursue this. But you have got to become aware of the fact, or it's right there before you, that the very things that rhetorically have been denounced, and even the wiring that you denounce is rhetorically, that in other words would appear to be D, at the real scientific level, become a matter of C. I got so damn mad I could almost die. But it was a heat gain. I felt good. Yeah, but I feel bad about feeling good. I shouldn't feel good. Do not look at large groups of people annihilating one another, threatening one another's existence. It's a matter of locus cura, locus comita, that there must be an area in which any group, I had been picking out nationalities, countries, my X, Y, and Z, and I'm talking about individuals, but there has got to be a place that you have a responsibility in life's body. You might also note by now that in ordinary humanity, there is no individual feeling of responsibility. And I'm not talking about morality, is no one feels in any way that they are responsible individually. You don't even feel that you can relate to life individually. That's why certain very small areas of life's body speaks through men that criticize nationalism, laugh at patriotic parades we're having here in this country today. Or you can laugh at the parade of nationality or Liberation Day in some other country and think, well, those dumb people. At any rate, all of you have heard that kind of thing decried, or to laugh at somebody else's religion. Or how can these individuals be misled by some maniac who says he is now retranslating some old holy book? You're looking in the wrong place. Look down at your own level of ordinary consciousness, and the only way you feel that you exist is in some locus, in some specific locale. And it's by and large, it's going to start off, and forget family, that's just almost you. You may have tried to resist the draft here in this country. At a line level consciousness, you may have been the kind of person that was burning effigies of past presidents. But you've got no sense at line level consciousness of being a responsible individual. There's nobody to be responsible to. And what I'm saying, let me warn you one more time, I am not trying to specify some relative value I want you to see and to feel yourself. It's not that hard to feel. that there is no conception at line level consciousness. In fact, for most of you now, it's still the same, at least the same sensation. There is no feeling of existing as some kind of responsible individual. To whom are you responsible? What is your responsibility? The only thing that's available in life is I feel responsible for being a good American, a good Puerto Rican, a good Italian. I feel responsible for being a good Jew, a good Christian. I feel responsible for being a good Irishman, even though I'm an American. I'm of Irish descent. And it gets into smaller areas, but they are nonetheless, according to the individual, important. I feel all my life I have worked in the mines. I worked here for the ABC Coal Company. My father did. It's not paradise, but there's a kind of responsibility. If they go on strike, I go on strike. If I see a very negative piece in the news about miners, especially around here, or even across the country, I feel a kind of responsibility. I want to speak up, or at least to myself. I want to talk to the TV commentator. I've had that, you some old Princeton educated guy. You don't know what goes on in the mines. You would never gone to school if you weren't down in the mines producing the coal and getting out petroleum products. It is simply, you cannot feel, ordinary people, any kind of individual. I'm talking about actually, truly, in the sense individual, I in some way have a responsibility. I'm not preaching to you, just, I'll give you a second. You can't find it. Nobody has any sense that I am individually responsible. I'm responsible within the context of some locus, of some area within life. And of course, I'm saying you within life's body. I am responsible in the sense that I'm a part of some larger group, and that larger group, of course, is fulfilling some specific, albeit perhaps passing, but a specific function within the body of life. And if it is alive, it is engaged continually in transfers of heat and energy, and sometimes it gains and sometimes it loses. But once you see it, when it loses, that is D. It's not relative to that group of people. It is D. They're not misled. Bodies, that locus, that locale in body's life is not misled. It was D. That, of course, does not mean by any means that that is going to be strongly morbific, much less deadly to life, because it's going on in your body. This continual dance, this continual, one area losing energy, another gaining, one area gaining heat, one losing heat. It's happening between you and people. It's happening between you and sexual partners. It's happening between you and people staying on the street corner. It is happening between me staying here and you out there. It is going on at every level, but based upon the locale in which you are, if you are the viewer, the participant, the group to which you belong, the locus to which you are responsible. You couldn't help it, that's where you are. It's where you're responsible, and it is also a matter of gaining the food. If it is a heat loss, it is D. It's not debatable, it's not religious, it's not relative. And those that gained, apparently, in this isolated situation, those that apparently gained at your expense, you and your group lost energy and heat, and they gained it. For that time and that locale, it was C. It's not relative, it's not debatable, and it has nothing to do with morality. It was C. But can you, for a second, see the obvious? That if, let us say, you're in the former group that lost heat, for you to look at the other group and accuse them of being evil is correct. They're the ones that took my heat. They're the ones that invaded and took over our allies. That is, a source of food, minerals, military support, as they call it. We lost heat. You did us evil. And that's true. But they did not do evil. They did good. Because they gained heat and energy for their locale. That is the absolute beginning and end of good and evil. A couple of quickies to leave by. I'll make it one. I'll save the other one. This is in line with many of the ones I've been asking over the last few months, but listen right quick, because most of you know by now that the potential profit in this is not by any means limited to my words, but I always make them short and sweet so that you can do something with it. Think about the circuits. Think about me splitting up the life of man into this three-storied corporation, the way I described, or one set of descriptions to the different levels, the different departments. Then let us put you in bed on a weekday, assuming everyone has a job to go to. You look over and the clock says it's 7:30, which is your time to get up, and you get up. You get up. You look, you see the time, and regardless of what's going on, I mean, notwithstanding some serious illness, notwithstanding fatigue, notwithstanding a hangover, notwithstanding insufficient sleep, you get up. Now listen. It's Sunday. You're in bed. No plans. But eventually, you get up. Now, listen. What makes you get up on Sunday? Remember, I started out, I gave you the preface of neuralize the matter of the circuits, but there you lay. I'm not going to tell you but just a few other little quick things. You lay there, maybe you wake up a half dozen or a dozen times. It's cool. You can sleep late. There's nothing to do, nothing. Nobody's waiting on you. But yet eventually you get up. Eventually, it's as though, some variation of this goes through everybody's circuitry, it's as though finally, maybe it's at 12 o'clock, maybe it's at 1:30, and it probably goes on several times, but then once, it's like the voice finally says, hey, you know, enough's enough, you've got to get up. And you do. And there's nothing planned. What makes you get up on Sunday morning?